Elementary Algebra, Final Assessment 2, Review, questions 20 through 22. Question 20 reads, in a local election, 36,400 people voted. This was an increase of 7% over the election. How many people voted in the last election? Round to the nearest whole person, if necessary. So when we look at this problem, let's start by giving each election a variable. Let's say that the last election is X. So last election equals X. And let's say that the current election equals Y. Now what we want to do is set up a formula. We know that the current election, Y, is equal to the last election, X, plus an increase of 7%. So this will be 0.07, if we put it into a decimal form, 7% of the last election, which we know to be X. So 0.07 times X. Now we have a formula to work with. We know that Y, the current election, is equal to 36,400. So we'll plug that value in for Y. So 36,400 equals X plus 0.07X. Let's simplify the problem and then we can solve for X. So the 36,400 stays the same on the left side. On the right side we have X and X. In front of this X here, remember we have a 1. So this is 1X plus 0.07X. So 1.07X. Next, we'll divide the 1.07 out. So we'll divide out 1.07. We now get X is equal to 34,018 and 69. Now, if we look back at the instructions, it says to round the nearest to the nearest whole person, if necessary. We know that X was the last election. That's what we're trying to find out. So this is the last election. To finish the problem, we're going to round to the nearest whole person, which is 34,019. So our final answer is 34,019 people voted in the last election. Okay, now for question number 21. The instructions read, for the given graph, write the inequality in set builder notation and interval notation. I'm going to start with the interval notation, and that's because when we have a graph, we can actually copy the interval notation directly off the graph. We do this by reading the graph left to right like we would a book. Starting on the left side, reading towards the right, the first thing we run into is a parenthesis graphed. So we'll copy that parenthesis. Then we write down what that parenthesis is recorded on, in this case the -2. Now we follow the graph along, and the next point is at a +2. So we'll put comma +2, and again it's another parenthesis to close it out. This is the interval notation. Next, I want the set builder. A set builder always starts with a brace. Next, we record the variable. Well, in this case, it doesn't tell us what the variable is, so we can choose any letter of the alphabet. I'm going to choose the X, so I'll put the X. Now, every set builder, once you have the variable in, is followed by a straight bar. This means X such that. Now I'm ready to put in the inequality. Now, with this, it's a little easier to first pull out your constants and your variable and put the inequalities in second. What I mean by that is, reading left to right, I see I have a -2. Now I know I'm going to need an inequality in here somewhere, and it's going to go with the X, so I leave a space for that inequality. And then I'm going to need another inequality on the other side, and then its next value is then the 2, so I'll put that 2 and close out my braces. Now I'm going to come back and put in my inequality symbols. So looking in here, all my values are between a -2 and a 2. So I know that if I'm looking at the -2 to the X, that the -2 has to be something, the -2 has to be less than the X value, because the -2 is over here to the left side. So because X has got to be anything greater. So I need a less than symbol put in here. Another way of looking at that is the X is greater than the -2. So it gets the side of the inequality that's larger facing it. Now I'm going to come over here and put the inequality on the other side. Now for this one, I see that the X value has to be less than the 2. So again, I'm going to put in a less than value, because when I look at this, X is less than the +2. My X values are all less than a +2. In question number 22, the instructions read solve and graph. Write the equation set in a set builder notation and in an interval notation. So looking at this problem, before we can write it into a graph or write it into a set builder or interval notation, we need to solve. For the moment, treat the inequality symbol like it was an equal sign. So we'll start by getting this -10 to the other side. So I'm going to sum a 10 to this side. Whatever I do to one side, I'll do the other. So I come down here and I end up with a +m, or 1m, -2 is greater than or equal to, this went to a 0, plus 4. So to move the 2, I'm going to add a 2 to both sides, +2. So I'm left here with m plus 0 is greater than or equal to 0 plus 6. So taking out the zeros, I'm left with m is greater than or equal to 6. So I've done the first part of the instructions. I've solved. Now I want to put it into my forms. Let's start with the graph. It says solve and then graph. So let's make a graph. I know I'm going to have a 6 on it, so I'll start the middle of my graph with the 6 and move out from there, so that I give myself plenty of room to work. Alright, so I'm going to come in here, and on the 6, that's where I'm going to graph. And according to this, it's greater than or equal to. When it's a greater than or equal to, I use a bracket symbol. Now I need to decide which way it opens. It says that m is greater than or equal to 6. So the direction that's greater than is towards the positive infinity. So that is going to open towards the positive infinity. And then I graph it out. Don't forget to graph it out. Right? Don't just put the bracket on and then leave it. You still need to put your line on here and put an arrow to show it's going out to infinity. Now, coming down from there, let's go ahead and put this thing into a set builder format. So the set builder is going to start with a brace. It always starts with the brace. In this case, our variable is an m, so we write the m such that. So this is how every set builder starts out, with a brace, the variable, and then the line such that. Now I can put that inequality in there, and it's m is greater than or equal to a 6, then close the braces. If the braces are not present, the answer is not correct. Let's do the interval notation next. The interval notation we can read right off the graph. Reading left to right, I see I run into a bracket, so I'll put a bracket, and it's graphed on the 6, so I'll put a 6 and then a comma. And then I look to see where it's graphing out to. Well, it's just continuing on. It doesn't end. It's going out towards the positive infinity. So I'll put an infinity symbol, and then I'll close this with a parenthesis. We use parentheses whenever something is not equal to that value. Well, nothing can be equal to infinity. So next to the infinity symbol, there should always be a parenthesis.